As we've heard today, also marks the anniversary of the deadly shootings and bombings carried out by confessed mass killer Anders Breivik in Norway. To get a better understanding of what drives people to commit these attacks, we're joined by Mullen, an Emeritus Professor of Forensic Psychology at Monash University. Professor Mullen is a clinical psychiatrist who studied violent criminals, including Martin Bryant, who killed 35 people in the Port Arthur massacre. And Professor Mullen joins us now from Melbourne. Thank you for joining us, Professor Mullen. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Of course, the big question that is coming in the wake of the shootings in Denver, Colorado, is the question of why. Can these sorts of attacks actually be explained?
I think we can go a certain way. Perhaps one of the most interesting things about these killings, where an individual goes into a public place and kills people until they themselves are killed or until they're captured, only started happening in Western society relatively recently. The first episode of this we know about was in Germany in 1913. The second was in 1924, only a few hundred metres from where I'm now sitting in the Botanical Gardens in Melbourne. And every few years one of these things occurred, up until 1966, when the very well publicised mass killing at Texas University occurred, for which a film was made afterwards. And this seemed to create a cultural script for angry, disaffected, desperate young men who were thinking of suicide to kill themselves in what they saw as a blaze of glory. And then from then on it started to accelerate, started to occur every year. Last year, there was somewhere in the world, every month, one of these episodes of mass killing occurred. So we've got a very rapid spread of what is a cultural script. And what is interesting is, who in the world is it that wishes to follow a script which involves killing strangers in large numbers and either finishing up dead or, less likely, captured and tried?
So when you talk about a cultural script, are you talking about, for instance, the reporting of these kinds of crimes?
It's partly reporting. There's no way you can't report mass killings. What is curious is why this has entered into our society now. Other societies have it. If you think of the Malaysian amok, where people have for hundreds of years, we know, young men have gone out into the street, started killing people at random until they themselves are killed. So it isn't the only society that this has ever established itself as a way for certain sorts of people to gain both satisfaction, glory, and the death they seek. The type of people who do this in our society is not that dissimilar from the type of people who commit amok in the Malaysian society. In other words, you're talking about men between 20 and 40. They are almost all social isolates. Interestingly, they are almost all rather obsessional, rigid individuals, and they plan these things very carefully. They are almost always people who have an excessive interest in things military, police, survivalist, fascination with guns. Many of them have extreme right-wing views, which fits into this whole them as major, glorious authority figures. They also are very conscious of those who've gone before, so that there's an imitation in this. We find, even with the dimmer ones, let alone people like the man who's just committed these killings, that they've often accumulated an enormous amount of information about people who've committed these kinds of mass killings previously. There's no way you can't publicise it. I think you can go too far. I think it's an absolute tragedy that the Norwegians have allowed Breivik to have a public forum, really, and a podium from which he can address the world. That increases the chances of people wanting to imitate Breivik around the world many, many times, and we will pay a price for the Norwegian good intentions.
Professor Mullen, you've just mentioned the situation in terms of Anders Breivik, who we are looking at 1 year since that particular attack in Norway. And the question is, was he or was he not insane? What's your take on that?
Most of these people are not. Very few of them have histories of mental disorder. A small number of them, about 10%, have major mental illnesses. But the majority, which is much the same for any serious violent crime. So they're not particularly likely. We will not find, I suspect, that this young man from Colorado is psychotic. He might be, but the chances are he won't be. Was Breivik insane? No, not in the legal sense. In a common or garden sense, of course he was mad, but not in a legal sense.
And Professor Mullen, in terms of your experience in this area, you completed the report on Martin Bryant after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. Do you have any particular insights that you can offer us in terms of this situation now that's happened in Denver, Colorado?
Well, I mean, you've just heard from someone who gave a very sensible indication about gun control. I mean, gun control doesn't stop these things, but it does reduce the lethality. We've had several of these episodes since gun control in Australia, but all of them involved weapons which have resulted in a small, too many deaths, 2, 3, 4, but none of them have produced these mass killings. You need the semi-automatic weapons to do that. So gun control is part of it. I think also we need to learn a lot more about what leads up to these events. We've got a fairly good handle on it. And I think, oddly enough, the internet is our problem, that people can get enormous amounts of information. They can feed their fantasies, put these glorious pictures of themselves on, like Breivik did, get caught up in how important they are within that pseudo community. But it's also maybe our way into picking these people up early. Because they have a certain pattern of internet usage and they have certain areas of interest, and fascinatingly they go to very specific sites, as do many other people. But at least we can start picking up the high-risk ones, particularly if we can also link that to attempts to obtain the kind of weapons which are required for these terrible events. Very important to remember, these are not spontaneous. They are planned over weeks or months. And that doesn't matter whether the person is psychotic or not. These are rigid obsessional people, whatever else they may be, and they plan things carefully, they prepare carefully, and to some extent, out there is the information of their preparation, which we could pick up, and we will catch far too many people, and it will then be a matter of sorting out the sheep from the goats, but that doesn't matter. I mean, the important thing is to give these people, dare I say it, the help and assistance they require to deal with the problems which are overwhelming them before they turn into mass killers.